On this episode of Seahawks Forever, powered by BetUS, Jacson Bevens of the Cigar Thoughts column and podcast, and he has some news in that area. We'll get to that, of course, brings his unique perspective to the show, something I needed this week coming off the bad loss to the Bills. Jacson calls it zooming out, setting our passion as fans for the team aside as much as we can, trying to take an analytical, objective look at what's wrong with this team, the coaching staff, the front office, the players. Where are we at? Where are we headed? How are we going to get there? Jacson Bevens joining me today on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Hit that like button on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to support it. And hit that bell button so you're always notified of future episodes. If you're listening on audio, just be sure to subscribe so it's in your library. It downloads. You know when there's new episodes. And if you like what you're listening to, leave us a rating or a review if you would. And all the other ways you can support the show are listed down in the description. Also, if you head on over to BetUS, you'll see all of the prop bets for the Rams Seahawks coming up this Sunday, their current point spreads. And if you sign up for a new account today, they'll give you a 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit, 125% on your second and third deposits, up to $2,000. Use the promo code YouTube150 at BetUS. All right, let's not waste any time. Let's get into this with Jacson because just a really great conversation. Really enjoyed every moment of this. Always love his perspective. So informed. And I think you're going to like it too. So without further ado, Jacson Bevens. Well, Jacson, before we get into talking about this Seahawks team, you have been writing the Cigar Thoughts column for a very long time. It's how I discovered you. Really enjoy your writing style. But you dropped a little bit of a bomb the other day. This is going to be your last season writing the column?
Yeah, it is 13 years, I think. I'd have to go back and check. Something like that. But I think I started doing that column right around the time Pete Carroll first came in. And yeah, just been writing post-game articles about this team after pretty much every game since. And honestly, it's been therapeutic for me. Cigar Thoughts is my therapy after a game, and a chance to just kind of put my impressions of the game into my language. And it's honestly been shocking how much support it's received over the years. But yeah, I appreciate you saying that.
The appeal for me, and I think this would explain why so many people enjoy it, is you have an ability, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on this week. A, it's just been too long, and B, yeah. I needed to hear some Jacson. You know what I'm saying? You're able to be hard on the team when it's necessary and honest about who they are and where they are, while also maintaining some level of optimism and your passion for the team. Mm-hmm. And passion is something that comes out in many different ways, depending on who you are. And right now, coming off that loss, 31-10 to the Bills, where they looked terrible for the most part, this is how a lot of the passion's being manifested among the Seahawks fan base. Fire Mike Macdonald. He's lost the team. Bring back Pete. McDonald's a bottom 5 coach in the league. He has to go. The defense is pathetic. I turned off the game. Going to go enjoy the rest of my day. Mike Macdonald isn't living up to the hype. Fire Mike Macdonald. His teammates are fighting on the sideline. He's a fraud, right? This is what we're seeing already. What is wrong with people?
Yeah, I mean, we're passionate as sports fans. We're passionate, and this is why I always preach zooming out as being a sports fan. Remembering why we do this. Why do we give up potentially sunny Sunday afternoon in the fall in the Pacific Northwest, which is like heaven, to watch this team? If your baseline is I'm waiting for them to piss me off, man, just recalibrate. Remember why you care. I love the Seahawks, and I get super frustrated when they stink. But the Seahawks belong in a shoebox that I can open up every weekend and take out. And then when it's done, I process it, put the Seahawks back in the shoebox, put them back under my bed. And I love talking about them. I love thinking about them and all that thing. But, you know, the NFL is designed to draw everyone back to the middle. And right now, people are talking about this team like they're 2-6 or 1-7. They're 4-4. They're functionally tied for first in a competitive division in the first year of a new coach. And we want to see immediate success, and we want that success to be Super Bowl contendership and all of these things. It's great to be passionate. I'm really grateful for the Super Bowl 49 loss in a lot of ways. I've talked about this on my show. And just one thing I do want to point out, while this is my last season writing the column, the Cigar Thoughts podcast is going to continue. But something I've written about and talked about on my show, I'm really grateful for the Super Bowl 49 loss. Not that I'm glad they lost, but because within an exact year of each other, I experienced the highest high I'm ever going to have as a Seahawks fan when they won Super Bowl 48, blowing out the greatest offense of all time. Cementing a legacy. It wasn't just a Super Bowl win. They cemented a legacy for the LOB.
Yeah.
And then they had like arguably the most famous Super Bowl loss of all time. 1 year later, they not only do you lose, not only are you heartbroken, but now you're a punchline. Now it's the most famous play every single time. You're going to see it constantly. You watch the schisms that forms in your favorite team that had seemed so cohesive, all of these things. That's the lowest I'm ever going to feel. I don't care if they go 0-17. I'm not going to feel worse than I did in the aftermath of that game. So now I have the boundaries set. I know what the best feeling feels like. I know what the worst feeling feels like. The entire sum of the rest of my life as a Seahawks fan is going to fit between those two things. And it makes it easy to just bracket it. Like you guys who are watching this show, you watch the show because you care a lot about the Seahawks. If you read my stuff, it's because you care about the Seahawks.
Yeah.
But we're sports fans because we enjoy it. And the reason that I sprinkle in optimism isn't because I'm not going to be critical of the team. Anyone who reads my stuff or listens to me knows that's true. I'm going to call out the bad stuff when I see it. But this is fun. Football is fun. Having a team that has the expectation of winning the games that they're playing is fun. When you're cheering for a team that you feel has no shot, that's not fun. That's not this team.
Yeah, it's great perspective, and I think it hits on why I love sports too. But it's easy to forget because losing sucks and it hurts and it's painful. But it's the losing that makes the winning exciting, and we watch sports for the potential of having those highs and experiencing those moments. And I just watched again the doc that just dropped on Netflix last week with the Boston Red Sox in 2005 and that whole thing, and being down in their whole history in 86 years. And being a Red Sox fan and being close so many times and having it fall apart, usually to the same team, and to be able to come back and experience that high. And I remember Bill Simmons writing about that year. I think it was before he formed the Ringer. He was still at ESPN, talking about like, I'm in some ways now I'm good now for life because I've gotten to experience it once. But it resets your expectations. And is that a little bit about what we're seeing here, that some of these fans just got spoiled? Like, we've seen the highest high and now nothing else is good enough.
Yeah. And I know this is not what you're doing or what you do. But we consume a lot of our entertainment and our media and our sports in the margins of our lives. And sometimes it's easier to just put things into a category and not have the nuance. The thing that I want to make sure that we're not doing when we talk about the fans writ large of the Seahawks fans is there is still a lot of disagreement in how we see these. It's when they lose, you see a bunch of negative tweets and we focus on those and we see more of them because they just lost. A week ago, they beat a 4-2 team by 3 touchdowns on the road. And the nature of those tweets was much different. And it's easy to say, oh, Seahawks fans are this or Seahawks fans are that. They can't make up their mind. 1 week they think that, no, some people, it's like politics, some people are just, they're going to be on this side of the spectrum no matter what. Other people are going to be on this side of the spectrum no matter what. Doesn't matter what new evidence is given. Those opinions aren't going to change. Most people, if they were allowed to be honest, are going to exist somewhere on that spectrum between those two sides. And as sports fans, I think it's okay to have the nuance. It's okay to be really happy one week and really upset the next week. But again, zoom out, take it as a whole. If you offered me 4-4 through 8 games before the season, I'm probably taking it.
Yeah. And you say week to week, sometimes moment to moment too. I
Yeah,
can attest to that
absolutely.
myself too. Like I'm becoming a little bit infamous for how I tweet during games versus how I react to them afterwards. It's like two different people sometimes. And here's
think about the Giants game, right? Which to me is, the Bills loss is the worst loss. They just looked very bad. They looked like a bad football team. The Giants is the one loss where it's like, yeah, they should have probably won that game. Listen, Jason Myers makes that field goal and they win that game by 1 instead of losing by 9. They didn't play the football game any better if that happens. They played the exact same football game.
Right.
But now they're 5-3, and it's like, oh, that was kind of a letdown against the Bills. Hopefully they get right. But instead, it's 4-4, and they've lost 4 of the last 5, and everything is terrible. We're talking about a wildly different view of this exact same team with the exact same performance if a field goal doesn't get blocked.
I was just thinking that last night about the Bills game. Even if I went back and I hadn't gotten a chance until last night to rewatch the broadcast because I was at the game, and I find that doing that helps more in a bad performance. You see things in a different light, and certainly some of it's because you know the outcome and so you're prepared for it. But if you just take 4 plays out of that first half, as bad as everything looked overall, as bad as the result was, and people are talking about how it. If you hear most fans describe how they played in that game, we just got our ass handed to us for 60 minutes. But it's if you just take 4 plays, the two 1-yard line performances with the where Connor Williams was heavily involved in both of those, and you can go and dissect either one. You know, Zach Charbonnet almost scored on a run before that. Ken Walker almost scored on a tunnel screen. If you perform better there, you have a lead, changes the way you play. If Josh Allen's kicked fumble doesn't result in a first down, if Derek Hall doesn't do the stupid thing and push Josh Allen well after
Great point.
The Seahawks could very well have a lead at halftime, maybe even a 2-score lead. And the point I'm trying to make then isn't that, well, then they win the game. But then even if Buffalo comes out and replicates the exact same second half as they did and wins that game, we're all feeling way different about that game, and we're talking about 4 plays.
Yeah, and not to let the team off the hook, but you need to not go in the tank when those 4 plays happen.
Yeah.
Right? Because they did. There's no way around it. I'm usually the last guy that's gonna say like, oh, they didn't care enough or they weren't prepared or whatever. Listen, these guys are fighting for their livelihoods. They have given their entire lives, reworked everything about their relationships and priorities to be in a position to be on an NFL football field. Yeah. And unless you're in that top 5% of that top 0.001% of football players, your job's not safe. Yeah. So this isn't a lack of effort thing. It's not a lack of preparation, but what it was a lack of discipline. And there's, the old momentum debate got brought back up on Twitter this week, and whatever. I'm not going to wait. I definitely have opinions on it, but my point in bringing it up isn't to say that. It's that when you are competing and there's a string of things that go against you, whether you want to call it momentum or not, there is a feeling that is very easy to permeate. Just like when everything's going well, you're out golfing and you hit 4 or 5 great shots in a row. Guess what? You stop analyzing your swing. Yeah. You just play. And then you continue to play well most of the time. It's the same with any sport, probably the same with most endeavors. And when things are going bad, you need to have the discipline to stay focused and not go out and make another double bogey just because you did on the hole before. You have to stay disciplined to what you've been taught to do, and that is not what the Seahawks did. That was the disappointment for me. And discipline and details was the selling point for Mike Macdonald. Now, I am not going to write this guy's obituary or laud him after 8 games. All we have are data points. And that was a really bad data point for a coach who who again, the calling card is details and discipline.
Just to give a little context, I wanted to throw these tweets up because, we talked about how some Seahawk fans are calling for people's jobs and down on Mike Macdonald. This is just a sampling of what Baltimore Ravens fans are saying. They want Mike Macdonald back. They're not necessarily happy with the performance of the defense under Zach Orr, who was certainly Macdonald's protege while he was there. So, tale of two cities and two organizations. But
100%.
Did we just expect too much out of Mike Macdonald as a first-year head coach?
I mean, maybe. I don't know. I mean, what was the expectation looking at the schedule? They're going to be 6-2 at this point? I
drank the Kool-Aid. I got so excited about him, his track record, his intellect, the way he talked about the game, and I allowed myself to get what now is very clearly overly optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I mean, I'm with you. I thought they were going to win 10 games this year. They 6-4. 6-4 is not an outrageous thing. The other thing that I always try to remind myself is the NFL season feels like this small thing, and after a few games, you know exactly who a team is. But these guys never stop training. They're learning a new language on defense. They're learning a new language on offense. They have personnel deficiencies, but players get better. You see it all the time. I mean, shit, if you play fantasy football, you knew that the most green light team you could ever start your players against was Washington Commanders this year, because they stunk on defense for like 4, 5, 6 games.
Yeah.
But why is their coach Dan Quinn? Defensive guy, right? You bring in, like Seattle, this defensive guru, and your defense stinks. Well, look at their last 2 games. They've been awesome, borderline dominant on defense. And that's because they have gotten better. They are learning Dan Quinn. They are coming together. They're learning each other. So I'm not saying that's going to happen with the Seahawks. I'm just saying to assume that Mike Macdonald is all of a sudden not the defensive genius we thought,
right,
is just too early. It took him 2 years at Michigan. It didn't happen right away at Baltimore. Those were bad defenses that he took over. Seattle is a bad defense. If we're at this point of 2025, the halfway point, and the defense looks like this, okay, let's have that conversation in earnest. I'm not going to do it after 8 games.
Yeah, I keep talking about it. That Baltimore defense, his first year as defensive coordinator, it took half a season and a trade for Roquan Smith to really bring that thing together. There's some parallels there, kind of in the way that they've started, and then the Seahawks going out and getting Ernest Jones last week. But I mean, they gave up 55, I think, to Miami early in that season. Like, they were a mess. Yep. It takes a while, and he was hired so late in the process. And I think this is something that maybe isn't getting enough traction. Like, that staff was built from scratch. Yes. There were some other head coaches John Schneider could have chosen to hire if he wanted to earlier in the process that could have brought a ready-made coaching staff with him, guys that he's worked with, that he understands their method, that they understand each other's language and can kind of read each other. McDonald built this staff completely from scratch. Like, John sort of joked about it during the draft process, but which also they weren't involved in this year because they were getting to know each other back in Seattle. And so, we talk about players having to learn to play together. Coaches have to learn to coach together. And I'm so glad you brought Dan Quinn up, because I had an idea this morning and I went back and looked and it doesn't always confirm your prior when you go back and look at the data. This time it did. When Dan Quinn got his first coaching job, when he was hired away from the Seahawks to go take over the Falcons in 2015, he wasn't hired until February 2nd, officially. Like, the job was his, right? But they had to wait until the Seahawks were out. He gets hired by the Falcons, who had some pieces in place, certainly on offense. They did, Matt Ryan and Julio Jones and some decent offensive linemen. They had a couple dudes on defense, and Grady Jarrett and a couple others, but not Marcus, but the other Desmond Trufant was on that team. But they didn't have a bunch of all pros. They start 5-0, right? Everybody's feeling good about them. Although those 5 teams end up finishing the season 10 games below 500. So they start 5-0 against an a favorable schedule. They lose 8 of their last 11 to finish 8-8 and miss the playoffs. And then guess what? They have a full offseason for the coaching staff and the front office to align, to adjust the roster, another year of teaching their schemes and fitting them to the personnel. They go 11-5. I always get the numbers mixed up now because it was, I'm still not used to 17 games. They beat the Seahawks in the divisional round. They go to the Super Bowl, almost win it, should have won it. Massive turnaround in year 2. I see some parallels potentially here.
It's a great call. I mean, that's the case for optimism. We are just so fucking wired for immediate, not even immediate satisfaction, just it requires effort to withhold an opinion. It is so much easier to just say, okay, I have resolved how I feel about this thing that I care about. I'm moving on. And it's hard. It's a challenge to remain fluid and to remain nuanced. And people will tell you that's a lack of conviction. I don't think so. I'm always saying your opinions should be able to be influenced by new information. Doesn't mean being wishy-washy. Just weigh it. Like Muhammad Ali said, one of my favorite quotes, the man who believes the same thing now that he did 30 years ago has wasted 30 years of his life. It is important to keep bringing in new information and just weigh it and say, okay, this is a new piece. Truth, if there is a capital T objective truth in the universe, it is white light. But people are a prism, and we can only see the light get refracted through one facet of that prism, which means I may see green where you see blue, where another fan sees pink or yellow, right? We're trying to get as good a whole perspective as possible to get as close to seeing that true white light that's on the other side as we can, knowing we're never going to get there. So the best thing that we can do is remain fluid and learn what information to prioritize over others.
Now let's try to talk about what is really wrong with this team right now today, right? And focus in a little bit on the here and now. I want to show you a couple of things because I felt like Mike Macdonald's verbiage and his message this week changed a little bit. He's taken a little bit of heat the last couple of weeks. We've heard this from a lot of fans. That sounds like a broken record. And I do think it's an underrated part of learning to be a head coach is how to handle being behind the podium 3 times a week. It's something that you don't have to do as a defensive coordinator. I mean, how often have we seen Adam Dirty, right? Like 3 times, maybe 4 times, or Ryan Grubb for that matter. It's and so
there's a reason Belichick was Belichick and Popovich was Popovich. Right? I'm not saying it's the only way, but
I mean, Pete Carroll was so good behind the podium, but he didn't get that way overnight. He probably wasn't that way at the beginning of his career in New York and New England.
I think he was pretty open about saying he wasn't.
Yeah. There's a learning curve there, and he's getting it. But I thought the tone changed this week a little bit, and in a couple areas. First, I'm going to put up a quote that's gotten a lot of traction this week, where he talks about the sunk cost quote. And Greg Bell did a great job breaking this down and writing about it in the Tacoma News Tribune. He says, I think you got to start making some decisions on where to narrow it down. You can't focus on everything. So taking out the stuff that we feel like is kind of sunk costs at this point, maybe trying to trim that, and then really focusing on and honing in on the stuff that we want to go excel at. That's the stuff that I feel like there may be opportunities that we haven't been able to take advantage of to this point. And stuff that we do feel like we're doing well, we can try to build on that a little. Then I want to follow up with this. This was him doing his coach's show on Monday on Seattle Sports 710. And I think this might have been a little bit more telling. I'm going to play this and then we'll react to it.
Yeah, kind of in that vein, how much of the playbook do you feel like you guys got in? Offensively, defensively, is everything there?
No, and the reason is because you can't. We haven't executed the things well enough and created the situations where we want to be able to get to everything. I think you can speak on both sides of the ball. So it's frustrating, you have some things that would help schematically, but the answer at the end of the day isn't the X's and O's. It's really not. I mean, everybody runs the same. Everyone runs some version of the zone, the mid, the inside to outside zone, some sort of gap gap runs, all the play action passes are the same concepts from week to week. It's just how you get to them, how you build it, how you block it, all those types of things. Defensively, I mean, everyone runs cover 3, split safety, their version of split safety, man. It's all about how you, all the fronts are the same as 4 down. I mean, everybody's doing some version of kind of the same pool of stuff. It's just at this point in the season, it's how well you can do it.
So he says a couple of things that stand out to me there. At the end, he talks about how everybody basically runs the same stuff, right? It's just kind of how you execute it and how you shape it. He talks about how the whole playbook hasn't been installed yet. And he kind of catches himself. He says, because we can't, I mean, we haven't executed it right.
Uh-huh.
And then he talks about how it's not the X's and O's. Is he trying to tell us that he doesn't have good enough players or enough good players at this point?
Yeah, maybe. And you have to be extremely careful about how you do that.
Yeah.
I didn't interpret it as him not protecting the team necessarily. Now, if this becomes a theme, then okay, maybe it looks a bit like blame shifting, and that's not something that I know about Mike Macdonald for or against yet.
Yeah.
Doesn't strike me as the type to avoid accountability, but maybe he is. I interpreted this as he took over captaincy of an old wooden ship that was really regal at one point, was terrifying to see come over the horizon. But it's just been sitting there, not doing anything for a while. And they, brought in some new crew members and some new parts, and then it was time to sail, and you raise all those sails, and now you see which ones work, which ones have holes in them. And if you want your boat to go faster, you put more wind in your main sails, not in the little ones. And I think that he is trying to figure out what are the main sails that we can lean into, right? Which ones do we need to, which aspects of our game, namely offensive line, especially run blocking and linebacker play, right? These are obvious deficiencies on this team. It would be dishonest not to acknowledge that. But I also think the other part of that quote is talking about what things we want to emphasize. We talked about the lack of continuity on this team from last year, from coaching staff all the way down through the players, through the language that they're speaking to each other. Well, the continuity was in the passing game. It's still Geno Smith, it's still DK Metcalf, it's still Tyler Lockett, it's still Jackson Smith and Jigba, it's still Noah Fant. That has been working. The Seahawks have been passing the ball great. And they are leaning into that. They have the highest pass rate in the NFL and by far the highest pass rate in neutral game situation. That is not because they don't want to run the football. It's because they don't trust themselves to run the football. So they have leaned into what has worked, and I think it's given them a chance even in the games that they've lost. And it's won them more than once, the games that they have won. So that's how I interpret it. And yeah, clearly it's looking like not re-signing Jordan Brooks, who is balling in Miami, and instead trying to piecemeal it with Baker and Dodson, now Ernest Jones. Too early to say on Jones, but that clearly hasn't worked. That was a miss. When I hear sunk cost, that is the exact place my mind went to, is we gambled on being able to coach up these new linebackers to do what we want them to do. We saved some money, and it didn't work. That was a miss. So do we double down on it? Do we throw good money after bad? Or do we say, okay, this is not something that we can fix right now. The guys aren't doing it. How do we take emphasis off of that part of the game and funnel what the other team is doing more towards what we're good at, which, when healthy, is defending the pass and rushing the passer?
Yeah. Hey, everybody, just a quick break to tell you about a new product that I am really excited about. It's the new Chairman Pro electric foil shaver from the folks at Manscaped. Manscaped, used, trusted, loved by over 11 million men worldwide. And this is a new product for them. And it's one that they gave me a chance to try. And I love it. I have never really been able to get a close shave with an electric razor. This one works. You should try it yourself. And if you do today, they'll give you 20% off plus free shipping. Head on over to manscaped.com. Use the promo code Seahawks. Yeah, you talk about the contrast between the 2 weeks. They go down to Atlanta, as you mentioned, and beat a legitimately good team. The Falcons went to Tampa and beat a good Buccaneers team the week after, right? But they got to play from ahead in that game. And it seems like this is a team that can still win. They can still win enough games to get into the playoffs. There's the really good teams. We're seeing it in Kansas City right now, man. They can win 10 different ways. Just about any way a game script unfolds, they can figure out a way to succeed.
I think the Lions are the best example of that.
Yeah. They can hang 50 on you, right? Or what was it, week 2, that overtime game where they can pound you with David Montgomery.
Just grind you to dust. Yep.
Absolutely. The Seahawks can't do that right now. They can only win one way, essentially. With the exception of maybe one of those.
And that was the Chiefs and that was the Lions not that long ago.
Yeah, not long ago at all. And I sense a little bit of that in these comments from McDonald as well. He talked in much the same way Pete Carroll did the very first day he stood behind the podium when he was hired, and he told you how he was going to play football. And he talked about running the football and being physical. Mike Macdonald said all the right things, or all the same things. He's not able to play that way right now. They can't run the football and be the physical team they want on offense right now because of the performance of that offensive line. And I feel like obviously there's frustrations on defense, but I have a hunch he knows he can fix that. Another offseason, a little more time for these guys to learn the scheme. That's his wheelhouse. I think he's really frustrated that they can't be physical on offense.
Oh yeah, I think that's true of every NFL head coach. Every NFL coach wants at least the ability to do that, right? And I think that, and this sounds so counterintuitive, but I think the Seahawks may feel that their best defense is their passing offense, which sounds insane. So just hear me out here. But in order to play downhill the way that Mike Macdonald and Ryan Grubb talked about being able to want to do, and every NFL coach wants to be able to play downhill. Well, you can only do that if you get uphill first. And the way to do that is to score points and score them early in the game. And that's why I think you see Seattle coming out, taking so many shots early in the game and really trying to score touchdowns fast, is because if they don't, they know other teams can just run on them all game long and take the ball out of their hands and keep them from doing right now the one thing that they're very good at, which is passing the football. So it's something where I think they are trying to make it easier on their defense, are trying to force a team like the Falcons, who ran for like 150 yards in the first half. Well, Seattle wouldn't stop scoring touchdowns. And then you get one big defensive play, and all of a sudden the Falcons can't run the ball anymore. I think they ran for like 30 yards in the second half.
Yeah.
That's how you do it. That is how you funnel the other team's offense into doing what you do well, is by scoring a lot of points and trying to score them early. And that's why I think they've been so aggressive through the air.
It certainly explains that approach. And, again, just saw it this morning, the Seahawks third in the league overall at number of total pressures by their defense. And that's even taking into account that they're losing the time of possession battle at times, and they're facing teams that are shredding them in the running game. I mean, that pressure number sure seems like it could easily be higher if they were in more of those game situations. I do question sometimes, though, how they go about achieving that. We're not seeing a whole lot of under center. We're not seeing a lot of 12 and 13 personnel. Like I've said this at times, I feel like I'm watching a Mike Leach coached football team sometimes. Where it's just like, screw it. We're not going to run. We're not even, I don't care, Jimmy Lake, that you know what we're going to do. I'm not even going to try to change my game plan to run the football. I'm just going to spread it out and try and throw it all over the yard. Your assessment overall, given what you just said about the offense and that being the strength of the team in Ryan Grubb's first season as play caller.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good pushback. What I don't see from this coaching staff, at least yet, is incompetence. In fact, I think when it comes to game management, this is the most competent we've seen our coaching be in terms of handling a dwindling clock at the end of first and second halves, timeout management, when to review calls, being unemotional on the sidelines, understanding the win probability of your decisions. It doesn't mean that you have a computer make all your plays for you. That's not what this team is doing. There is still feel, there is still art to calling plays and making sideline decisions, but you need to understand the data. And Mike Macdonald is a quantitative analyst by trade. That's what he went to school for.
Right.
This is how his brain operates, and it's part of what's made him so successful as a positional coach and as a coordinator. And I think with Ryan Grubb, one of the things that I was excited about with him was he was able to win in different ways. The passing offense got all the accolades when he was at Washington for good reason. But there were games like the UFC game last year where the passing game, for whatever reason, wasn't working. I think Penix was hurt or sick, and Polk was out, and it wasn't clicking. Well, all right, it's Dylan Johnson today.
Yeah, it was like 30 carries for. Yeah, it was crazy.
That's great. You had the best offensive line in football.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't think he needs the best offensive line in football to use his full playbook to tie it back into what Mike Macdonald was talking about, not being able to use the full playbook right now, is because you can't just say, okay, you know what, passing game's not working, we're just going to hammer the run. Like they did that. They did that against the Broncos in week 1. And the pass game was really struggling in the first half. They were able to turn it over to Ken Walker and win that game. And
against a defense that has proven since then to be one of the most stout in the league.
Yes, absolutely. But when you're just losing your matchups up front at the rate that Seattle is, and it only takes one guy on play side to lose his matchup.
Yeah.
The Seahawks have enough talent at their skill position players. I think they're top 5 in terms of just raw talent at the quarterback, running back, receiver, and tight end positions taken as a whole. But it doesn't matter if you lose up front. You can play to a draw as an offensive lineman. And with that level of skill, Geno Smith's acumen at handling pressure and navigating that, you can play to a draw and win that play. You can't lose up front and win the play. And right now, Seattle is just losing up front too often to get to the back pages of the playbook.
Given the flaws, some of the flaws in this roster that we've talked about, and the lack of success, glaring lack of success in certain areas, and some of it looking very similar to what we saw last year and the year before, especially on defense. What does this say about Pete Carroll? I mean, I was in the group of people who thought, it was just kind of time, right? The message had gotten a little bit stale, but also that I agreed with John Schneider when he sat at that podium after the move was made and said, we felt like last year's team over or underachieved at 9-7, should have made the playoffs, could have gotten more out of it. Did they maybe actually overachieve
last year? Yeah, I mean, they got outscored by like 50 points on the season. But again, we talk about the potential evolution of a team. That was the devolution of a team. They started out 5-2, and that game against Mike Macdonald's Ravens was the game of the week. 5-2 Seahawks, 5-1 Ravens, number 1 DVOA team versus number 2 DVOA team. That was a heavyweight fight. And clearly it wasn't. Seattle got exposed. A lot got put on tape in that game that other teams just copied for the rest of the season. So it's tough to say. I think one thing that we can say with certainty, and that I've never not said, Pete Carroll is a good coach. But Pete Carroll, yes, I do think there was staleness to the messaging, and that just happens.
Yeah.
But there was also a massive comfort level of 14 years of doing this, of knowing how to handle winning streaks, knowing how to handle losing streaks, knowing how to handle internal struggles when you got 2 players screaming at each other on the sidelines. Everyone's losing their mind about that happening in the Bills game. Like, that didn't happen every other week during the LOB era.
Oh, Bruce Irvin tweeted it.
Like
On Sunday.
that's
He's like, people
football.
don't even know. Yeah.
These are dudes in their 20s. They got testosterone coming out of their ears. They're the baddest dude in every room they've ever walked into. And you cannot have in sports a higher pressure, higher adrenaline intensity situation than playing an NFL football game with 60,000 people right there reacting in real time to everything you do, and then knowing that millions of people are going to react to your performance all week long. It's going to happen. I don't give a shit about them fighting. Jaron Reed absolutely needed to get on Derek Hall for that. And I don't know how he presented it, Derek Hall. He might have come in there and called him a sorry ass bitch. And you do that to an NFL player in the heat of a moment, you're going to get socked. Like, that's football. And they squashed it, and it's fine. But this is Mike Macdonald's first time handling something like that as a head coach.
Right.
And so there's just going to be a learning curve there. And Pete Carroll had been through all of that.
Yeah. And McDonald said even after the game to that point that like he'd rather see a team with that kind of fight than not. I think the way he said it is I'd rather have to say whoa than go. Like it's easier.
That's a great line. That's a bar right there.
Dial that back a little bit. It's a little easier to do that, or it's more preferable as a coach to have to do that than to try to get that out of players. Right. Those tweets I showed earlier, I could have showed just as many people that want to fire John Schneider. Right. Everybody wants to blame Schneider. And granted, there's a little bit more negative equity built up there because of the performance over such a long sample size of the offensive line. And that's what people want to point to.
Yep.
Certainly that's not going to happen. This group is going to at least, in my opinion, get one more offseason to try to fix this thing.
And they should.
But how long do you think the leash is? I mean, this ownership group now, one that we kind of thought was hands off after the death of Paul Allen with Jody running things, really stepped up and made a bold move last year that a lot of us weren't expecting at the time. How long do you think the leash is for John Schneider?
Well, Russell Wilson was an untouchable jewel in the crown of Seattle sports for a long time. And very shortly after Paul Allen passed away, Jody Allen was very involved in making the decision to move on from Russell Wilson. So I don't think it's just an infinite leash here. But I do think context matters. And look, if you want to zoom all the way out, Seahawks are fourth in wins in the NFL since John Schneider took over. Now, is that front-loaded? Yeah, for sure. I mean, you rip off a bunch of 11 to 13 win seasons, that's going to help. Yeah. But it's not like they have a bunch of 5 and 12 seasons either, right? Like they won their worst season, they won 7 games. And the Beastquake year, they won 7 games, first year, Schneider and Carroll. Okay, whatever. They won 7 games the year that Russell Wilson missed 3 games, then essentially just sucked because he was playing with hammer finger the rest of the way. Like he couldn't throw the football. Right. So what are we talking about? We're talking about 2 losing seasons in 14 years. So I'm not saying that to like let him off the hook. Like, oh, well, okay is good enough. You got to remember, this is still over a large sample size, a roster that has won more games than it's lost. And the criticisms of the offensive line are so valid in terms of process because for 10 years, Seattle did not invest in the front line consistently. Yeah. I don't think you can say that now. Yeah. They drafted Charles Cross with a top 10 pick. They drafted Abe Lucas with a day 2 pick. They drafted Christian Haynes with a day 2 pick. They brought in Connor Williams, a Pro Bowl center. They are investing real money and real draft capital up front. They are trying to fix that. Now, when arguably your best offensive lineman misses a season and a half, that's going to make it tough because I think as fans, we just assume, well, how can you not put together a good offensive line? We had Walter Jones on our show. He's like, look, if the worst guy on your team stinks, your offensive line is going to struggle. Like everybody has to do their job to have a successful play. And this is the greatest of all time saying that. There aren't 150 good offensive linemen on this planet by NFL standards. Right. Most fans of most teams are not happy with their offensive line play. The gap in athleticism, the gap in compensation is so big between defensive front players and offensive front players that the defense is going to be at an advantage in that situation. So when you lose someone who's as good as Abe Lucas was pre-injury, and hopefully he can get back to that, you do have to try and recreate that in the aggregate, and you don't have the available talent or the flexibility cap-wise to just go out and get a great one to replace him. So
yeah,
all of that is to say, like, yes, it hasn't worked up front and for a long time. And for most of that long time, you could blame process. I don't think you can blame process right now.
Yeah, which is why I keep telling people that have been coming at me the last couple of weeks with, like, they got to trade for a guard, who's trading a good guard away?
No one's trading a good guard.
No. Last question, just briefly, I guess, before I let you go, given everything we've just talked about, you got the Rams coming in here on Sunday before the bye. It's a crucial point in the season. It could go either way. A couple of weeks ago, looking ahead to this game, looked pretty favorable. Now the Rams are healthy. They got Nakua and they got Cup back. They're rolling on offense. They're feeling good about themselves off 2 wins in a row, including one over the Niners. Coming off a bye, right? One of 6 times this season, the Seahawks face a team coming off a bye or a Thursday mini bye. How you feeling about Sunday?
I think you play this game 10 times, the Rams win 6 of them. Yeah, they've got great vibes right now. But again, the Seahawks had great vibes after their Falcons game. All it takes is for a couple of things to go wrong. And if your team isn't locked in, it can snowball really, really fast in the NFL. And we saw Seattle snowball the Falcons a week and a half ago, right? A couple of things didn't go right for the Falcons, and Seattle put the foot to the throat. So that can happen. But it did look like Seattle was going to have a fairly sizable talent advantage going into this game a week ago, 2 weeks ago. Not the case anymore. I still think Stafford, when it comes to just actually playing the quarterback position, is top 5, top 6 in the world. He clearly has 2 phenomenal wide receivers back, got a great running back, and maybe the best offensive coach in football. So, it's going to be tough. They are going to have to score a lot of points to win this game. They're not going to win this game 19-17. They got to get 3 touchdowns and a couple of field goals to have a 50% chance of winning this.
Yeah, it's a tough one for me on a couple levels because my 2 fantasy quarterbacks in my main league are Geno and Stafford, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm going to do.
If DK plays, you've got a tough choice.
Yeah, indeed. Well, thanks, Jacson. It's always great to have you on. We accomplished exactly what I wanted to. I feel better walking away from this than I did at the beginning, and hopefully a bunch of my viewers do too. And just to remind everybody, you're going to write the column throughout the rest of the season.
That's right.
Right? Hopefully culminate in where's the Super Bowl this year? Is it New Orleans? Yeah. And then but the podcast remains, correct?
Yep, we're going to keep doing the show. And frankly, a lot of people, why are you stopping? Look, I love writing the article, but I kind of want to see what it's like to just be a Seahawks fan and just watch the game. and get my Sundays back too. It takes me about 3 hours after the game to write the article. That is kind of mentally and emotionally exhausting process at times. And I'm kind of looking forward to just being Jacson Bevens, the football fan, here for a little bit. And who knows, maybe I pick the pen back up down the road, but I'm really, really looking forward to writing the article the rest of this season, and looking forward to not writing it next year and seeing how that goes.
Well, as always, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks for taking the time, man.
Appreciate you, Dan.
All right. Always love having Jacson on the show and love your engagement and your thoughts. How do you feel about what he had to say? If you take his zoom out philosophy, try to take emotion out of it as much as you can. How do you feel about where this team is after 8 games at 4-4 under a new coaching staff? How close do you think they are to being the team that you want them to be, especially with the Rams team coming in this week that feels good about themselves? And we're going to talk about that tomorrow. Jake Ellenbogen, outstanding content creator for the Rams side of things, friend of the show. You've seen him on here before. We'll get his thoughts on this Rams team that finally seems like they're putting things together at a time when the Seahawks are at a crucial juncture heading into the bye. Follow me on Seahawks Forever. Subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell so you always get notified of new episodes. All the different ways you can support the show are down below. And a big shout out again to the folks at BetUS for sponsoring this episode. Until next time, thanks for watching. Forever and always, go Hawks.